Hi, I'm Mark, and I like to talk about UK politics and Brexit from an outside view. Although I do know the UK from the inside as well, so don't worry. British Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer wants to reshape relations between Great Britain and the European Union. Great Britain does not want to rejoin the EU, but merely strengthen its position on the world stage, as Starmer said at the press conference after the NATO summit last week in Washington. It's about a restart of our relations, not really an institutional restart, he said. It's not about returning to the EU, but it's definitely a restart. Starmer explained that after Brexit, very many people in Great Britain had the feeling that the United Kingdom was too inward-looking and no longer cared enough about its position on the world stage. The NATO summit offered the British Prime Minister a good opportunity to revisit relations between Great Britain and the EU after his Labour Party came to power in Great Britain. On Monday, Starmer said in an interview with the Irish newspaper Stormont that he was seeking a better trade agreement with the EU, and he described the agreement of former Prime Minister Boris Johnson as a failed deal. He was seeking closer ties with the European Union. However, closer cooperation with Brussels requires that Britain adheres to existing agreements. For example, checks on the movement of goods between Northern Ireland and the rest of Great Britain, which were introduced after Brexit and must not be ended. At the end of January, the previous British government announced that most goods would no longer be checked during transport between Northern Ireland and the rest of the country. The Conservative government of then Prime Minister Rishi Sunak wanted to abolish routine checks and no longer check most goods. In doing so, Britain's government wanted to end the political crisis in Northern Ireland. The new Labour government in the United Kingdom has also announced that it will support British agriculture and give priority to food safety. However, questions remain about the party's plans for the country's agricultural policy after Brexit. The party led by Keir Starmer has won historic victories in several rural Conservative strongholds in the UK and the general election on July 4th, and these include North Somerset, Southwest Norfolk and Suffolk Coastal. However, the Labour Party's manifesto did not mention farming funding. In contrast, the Conservatives and Liberal Democrats promised an extra £1 billion for the agricultural sector. Nick von Westenholz, Director of Strategy at the National Farmers Union, the NFU, told media that setting a long-term budget for the Environment Land Management or ELM program was crucial. The ELM program will replace the EU's multi-million euro agricultural subsidy program, the Common Agricultural Policy or CAP. Unlike in the EU under the CAP, where there is a 7-year multi-annual financial commitment, we have no spending commitment to fund these programs, explained von Westenholz. We obviously expect that some kind of budget will have to be made available, so the government needs to set out exactly what the budget for these schemes will be, and that as soon as possible. The Common Agricultural Policy's area-based payments will be completely abolished by 2027 and replaced by 4 agricultural policy measures. These will be implemented by England, Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales. The new Scottish policy remains aligned with the EU's hectare-based subsidies and complementary funding for sustainable practices. England and Wales, on the other hand, have moved to systems that reward environmentally friendly farming. The English agricultural sector, the largest in the UK, has faced uncertainty since Brexit. Successive Conservative governments have frequently amended the ELM scheme until 2023. The latest version allows English farmers to choose from over 100 measures to receive subsidies. These include reducing pesticide use, planting flowers that are attractive to pollinators, and optimizing fertilizer use to protect groundwater from pollution. Von Westenholz noted that it was unlikely that Labour would make radical changes to the existing schemes, but that it was very important to make them financially attractive to farmers. There is a concern that the budget is not enough and that farmers will not have enough of it to take on the scheme, as he says. The lack of clarity also meant that English farmers were slow to adopt the new schemes in the first few years of their introduction. However, this trend has improved recently. And Ben Reynolds, the executive director of the Institute for European Environmental Policy UK, that's a sustainability think tank, told media that farmers were increasingly demanding more ambitious schemes, suggesting a need for additional funding. Reynolds echoed the National Farmers Union's concerns about the inadequate budget, pointing out that cutting existing funding would undermine conservation objectives. Currently, the UK has committed to protecting 30% of biodiversity on land and in the seas by 2030. The country made this promise at the 2022 United Nations Biodiversity Conference in Montreal. Many of the UK's problems with nature can only be solved through good farming, as Reynolds says, and he advocated a carrot approach to encourage farmers. In Wales, the proposed Sustainable Farming Scheme, or SFS, which would replace EU funding under the Common Agricultural Policy, met with resistance, leading to nationwide protests by farmers in early 2024. The Welsh plan required farmers to implement a range of environmental measures to receive the subsidies. These included measures that were highly controversial in the agricultural sector, such as planting trees on 10% of farmland and allocating 10% to wildlife habitat restoration. Conservation charity Welsh Woodland Trust described the requirement as modest, given that the average tree cover on farms in Wales is already 6 to 7%. I think part of the problem with the Welsh scheme is the way it has been communicated or perhaps manipulated by certain vested interests, as Reynolds said. He also pointed out that Welsh farmers who are more reliant on the old per hectare subsidies of the EU's CAP find the new proposal financially unsustainable. In response to the protests, the Welsh government postponed implementation of the Sustainable Farming Scheme until 2026. This decision was welcomed by the National Farmers Union. Reynolds described the overall impact of Brexit on agriculture and the environment as a mixed picture. On the whole, I would say one of the positive aspects of Brexit from an environmental agenda perspective has been the trialling of new agricultural schemes, particularly in England, as Reynolds said. How many of these changes could we have made within the EU, he asks? Well, perhaps we wouldn't have had to leave to be able to make them, he says. So even that would have been possible. And looking at the discussions within the EU, and we will see when the new commission is up and everything, and about the coalitions there, yes, that would have been possible within the EU. I can tell you that. I'm quite sure about that. But if you want to know more, the next video is right here in the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.